Hi. Although this article in this video is related to Brexit, the video itself isn't really totally about Brexit, and so, you know, I don't want people who voted Brexit and strongly support it to think, you know, this is made as an anti-Brexit video, but rather it's a video to inform people whether they voted Brexit or not, and that's the truth of all my videos on this issue. It isn't that I'm against the people who voted Brexit. I feel their choice is a vote against the British people. Okay, well, in particular against the British children and the youth, British youth. And so, you know, I am trying to inform people of the information of why it's important to take the children and the youth into consideration over and above any concerns around immigration. The fact is that we're all under attack, and that as a nation we need to stand up for our rights in face of that attack, because our rights are the only things that are going to protect us. And rights and law, they are a muscle, and when you fail to use them, they grow weak, and then we're powerless, and then our rights are taken away, and then we have no right to stand up for our right. And on the Brexit side, there's been a lot of talk about freedom of speech. Well, human rights protect freedom of speech. And so this is something that is, the information I'm sharing, it is relevant to everybody. And if we want to sort out issues of immigration, then, as I say, we need to do that as a unified nation. And there are other ways of protecting our borders than completely leaving the EU. It is like chopping your leg off because, you know, you've got a few spots on your foot. How do we address the spots? Why chop the leg off? Fix the problem. There's lots of ways to fix a problem, aren't there? There are ways that will fix a problem that will actually cause greater damage. And there are ways to fix a problem that will actually improve the situation. Then the problem is fixed, isn't it? You know, it's no good fixing a door in your house if the manner in which you fix it means that your whole house collapses. This is just basic intelligence, basic common sense. But we've been moved far away from our basic common sense as a nation because we have been governed by mad people. And it's nobody's fault to have been influenced or persuaded by the rhetoric that's been bandied about. But there comes a point where we have to face our personal life reality and what is our future, what is our children's future, regardless of what our politics are. And this article in the Metro, this is from British young people. We are terrified for the future. Terrified. They're terrified for the future. And this is obviously directly in relation to Brexit, which really is a red herring, isn't it, when we look at it? It is a red herring, because it isn't just the EU that's the source of our problems, in the sense of austerity and job losses and poor wages, lack of social housing, a struggling NHS, it's what's been happening in Britain has happened, actually a lot of it, against EU legislations, against our human rights. You know, people's human rights have just been totally ignored. This is a government that's talked about how it's got more and more people into work, and yet at the same time, by 50%, it slashed all public service jobs and handed our public services over to a host of global corporations. So, whether or not we're in the EU, the fact is we're in with these global corporations who have their own rules. They have their own laws. So if you're working for a global corporate employment agency to work in global corporately owned British factories and businesses, then you're going to be working by their rules. Well, the EU has certain legislations that protect workers' rights, even workers on 0-hour contracts. This government wants to scrap all of those rights, as well as our human rights. It does not bode well. So whose rules are we going to be living with then? Whose rules will we be living with? The rules of the EU that protect our human rights and stand up for those within the EU, because yes, the EU itself is being infiltrated by this global corporate mob. And every nation within the EU have politicians who are being directly funded by this global corporate mob. They have a lot of money and a lot of power. And money doesn't just talk, it shouts and screams. Okay, so we are facing a huge battle here, both at home and within the EU. And what we're facing is, it is a global attack, isn't it? It is a corporate, global attack against humanity, against our rights, against our human rights. That is the collective ambition, isn't it, of these global corporations. They wish to operate in such a way as they operated pre-2 World Wars. They want to go back. They want to pretend like 2 World Wars never happened. The people never got a voice of sense and sanity and compassion and care. They want to totally eradicate that voice, go back to Victorian Britain, control the media, control speech, deny rights to the people, to the workforce, deny healthcare to them, deny them any legal assistance, change the law, write your own laws, allow yourselves to commit as many crimes as you like. So, again, people on benefits, people on job seekers allowance. So the benefits service is no longer run by the British government. It no longer is even an organisation that is required to employ British people. As a corporation, it can bring its staff in from abroad, as long as it's paying them over 30,000 a year. Well, you know, perhaps that might be necessary in a country where the British people actually refuse to do jobs that insist that they put large numbers of people on sanctions and leave them penniless for months on end. Because that is what has been happening. Those are the corporate rules, aren't they? That's not imposed by the EU, is it? That's not imposed by the EU. That's imposed by the corporation that's now running our benefits service on behalf of the British government and receiving huge subsidies and probably barely paying a penny tax. Because they have rules, don't they? You're 5 minutes late for signing on, then it's a £500 fine for you, so we'll stop your benefits until that's paid off. That's basically what a sanction is, isn't it? Imagine if you were 5 minutes late getting back to your car. Parking meters run out by 5 minutes and you get a £500 fine. Or in real terms, imagine that you're 5 minutes late coming back to get your car, it's overrun its parking time, and you lose your home, you have all your income stopped, so you can't keep your home, and suddenly you're in debt. Oh, and you're expected to look for work. So, you know, because that is the reality, isn't it, of the punishment. The punishment for being 5 minutes late. That you must now have nothing. You must now go and run to a food bank, or perhaps mummy and daddy will sort you out, or maybe you don't have a mummy and daddy. Maybe you've come from an abusive home, and actually, if you go back there, you're just putting yourself at risk. Maybe you'll end up homeless, sleeping on the street, or maybe you've got friends and family who'll let you stay at their homes for a few nights here and there and have a bath. You know, these are the things that are happening. And behind it all, overshadowing the whole thing, is this massive corporate debt. The bankers' debt, isn't it? That now we're all expected to pay. Because, don't forget, Britain as a nation had to borrow money off the World Bank to bail the bankers out. So as a nation, we are collectively responsible now for repaying that debt. And that is why the people of Iceland, as a nation, came out on the streets very peacefully. They didn't riot. Very peacefully they came out and protested until the whole of their parliament had to stand down. And actually, bankers got arrested for crimes. Let them pay for their crimes, not the people. And the British people seem to have lost that understanding, the basic understanding of the real enemy here. It's not Muslims, it's not immigrants. Far worse are the kind of immigrants who are on £30,000 a year who can be brought in to police our streets, to run our services, even to participate in the global corporate security firms and military that's set up here. These are very, very serious concerns. Now, whatever anybody might say about ISIS, at the end of the day, ISIS have not got the kind of powers to the extent that they can run Britain's courts, run all our services, and even own our government and every MP in Parliament. Because it is no humane force of power that conspires to deny, to scrap our human rights. And it's no wonder that the young people of Britain are terrified, because not only are we being governed by this insidious and actually criminal force of consciousness that presently the global corporations are in service to and are actually indebted to. Because let's face it, those corporations wouldn't exist without massive banking support. And every single one of those corporations themselves are in huge debt to the banks. Their profits are after what they paid off in interest of the debt. So they have a huge debt, they pay a little bit of interest off it, and then the rest is profit. How can that work? And they're getting richer and richer and richer, and more powerful, more powerful, more powerful. But ultimately behind them, who owns it all? The World Bank. And we've had to go running back to the World Bank to borrow money off the World Bank to bail out all of the private corporate banks that actually are already in debt to the World Bank anyway. And the bankers aren't even expected to pay interest back on the bailout money. But we are expected to pay interest on the money that we've borrowed from the World Bank. And at the moment, that interest amounts to over £1 billion a week. Okay? £1 billion a week. And that is going to increase, isn't it? Because the debt's getting larger. Because so the interest is building up. Because, you know, that interest is going to rise, isn't it? Suppose the interest rates went up by 5%. Which, when they got total control, the banks could do this. They raised the interest rates up by 5%. So that means that Britain then would be paying £5 billion a week. So from 50 billion a year to what? Times it by 5. You know, that's a huge sum. This is the future our children are facing. Who's going to be expected to repay that? Us today? The adults? No, it's going to be the young people. It's going to be the children. Their children. The children that are being born now, and the children of their children, and the children of their children. How long will it go on for? Do we trust this consciousness to actually have such control over us and our planet? When they're ignoring, consistently, continually, they've ignored us. They've ignored our protests about nuclear power. They've ignored our protests about pesticides and plastics. People have been campaigning against these things from the 60s and 70s. And we've been consistently ignored by corporate interests. And now those corporate interests have got to gain more and more and more power. They've wreaked havoc through the Middle East. They fully support criminal actions of other Middle Eastern nations like Israel and Saudi Arabia. What's happened to Iraq? That same force of consciousness, I'd quite happily see it happen in Britain. That same force of consciousness, that same powers, they are the ones that are funding the extreme far right in Britain, throughout Europe, in America. Corporate powers. We know that the Conservatives largely serve corporate powers. And I'll leave you links under this video, a couple of videos. Check, you don't have to watch the videos, just check the links under those videos about the corporate power in Britain and how this Tory government has opened its doors to them and closed the doors on British lobbying power, lobbying power of British people and the groups that represent British people, like trade unions, and how they've even limited our powers to fund our MPs. But the Tories can get as much funding as they like from the corporations that we know a lot of them, even themselves, have shares in. So we're dealing with people with vested interests. We're up against a very powerful force of consciousness, and it has reached into every facet of our society, and the people who have care and conscience and sense and sanity and balance are feeling very isolated and marginalised and oppressed. But we need to take courage. We need to understand that, look, that's not a true picture. We are the majority, the people of common sense, the people who have compassion. We are the majority. This is a nation that voted to ban hunting with hounds. Why? This is a nation that abolished slavery. Why? This is a nation that demanded an NHS and a welfare system to run alongside capitalist interests. We didn't stamp out capitalism, did we? No, we're not. We've never been an extreme nation. It's understandable that people have been upset by immigration into Britain. And a lot of that is the way that it's been done. That they just dump whole communities, really, of immigrant people into the poorest areas. They don't provide extra resources to the hospitals or the schools. They don't build extra homes for them. They don't provide more jobs. Naturally, the people on the ground already here, regardless of what their ethnic background may be, the British citizens, feel oppressed by that. And then there's the illegal immigrants. So they all start complaining about the illegal immigrants. But nobody complains about who's employing all these illegal immigrants, do they? Who employs them? Would they come here if they couldn't get a job? Who is prepared to exploit a person, an economic migrant, and pay them less than the British minimum wage? What criminal is prepared to do that? Because that's against the law to pay people less than the minimum wage. So what criminals among British businesses are prepared to do that? Why are so many small British businesses then driven to doing that? Is it because they're having to compete with big, powerful corporate businesses that are buying up and taking over all British small businesses? You know, it isn't the immigrant people we need to think about, it's the immigrant businesses that are coming into Britain and eating our society like a worm from within and causing corruption. And if it gets to the core, that's it. It will be terror. Life is terrible where there's no human rights. Have a look at Saudi Arabia. The sadistic consciousnesses of this world would relish living in a country like Saudi Arabia, witnessing inhumane punishments on the streets, being meted out for trivial offences, people utilising their right to freedom of speech and expression. Oh, no, we won't have that, will we? We won't have the right of freedom of expression and speech because the government wants to scrap our human rights, and it has pledged and promised to do so as soon as Brexit is complete. And yeah, the young people are terrified for their futures, and we need to be terrified for the futures of the little people who haven't reached their youth stage yet, the little children, the children being born today and their children. What kind of society are we going to leave behind for them? If we can't deliver sense and sanity into this world, then who is? And who will have a chance to? And I look to the future, it looks bleak. At the moment, it looks bleak. 700,000 people came out in London on Saturday, and that was a fantastic statement. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, we need that same amount coming out in every city. Because we need to unite, regardless of the divisions that have been imposed upon us. The class and the race and the faith and the this and the that. We need to come together as a nation to reach out across the divides, to keep the faith, to stand up for our rights, to unite.